I had always believed that my training would prepare me for any kind of client, no matter how challenging. After 2 months on the job as a child psychologist, I was beginning to wonder if I'd have been naive. Most of the cases I'd handled so far were heartbreaking but manageable. Girls battling eating disorders and boys tangled in the web of substance abuse. But last week I met Ryan. Ryan was different. When he entered my office, he seemed calm, almost polite, his demeanor entirely unremarkable. A handsome young boy with dark eyes and an easy smile that could almost fool someone into thinking he was just another teenager facing the struggles of growing up. But then he spoke, unraveling his history like it was a list of chores, each act more chilling than the last. First, he mentioned the bullying, the stealing, the arson, things that could almost be attributed to the usual storms of adolescence. But it wasn't until he mentioned the cats that I felt a deep, clawing chill, one that stayed long after he left. He described their final moments with disturbing detail, as though they were talking about something mundane, something requiring no empathy, no feeling. As I sat there, trying to absorb what he'd said, I couldn't ignore the unsettling sense of dread that crept in. I had read case studies about children who showed early signs of conduct disorder, those who felt no remorse for their actions, who could be frighteningly calculated. And yet, hearing Ryan's words firsthand brought a new visceral fear that no textbook could have prepared me for. In 3 days, he'd be back in my office, and I'd have to decide if I could even look him in the eyes again. My responsibility was to diagnose him, to determine a treatment plan that could alter the course of his life. But as much as I tried to suppress it, my mind kept returning to the cats, to his calm expression as he recounted what he'd done. Statistics show that only a small percentage of youth account for a disproportionate amount of violent acts, a percentage that Ryan could very well be part of. The next few days passed in a haze. I immersed myself in textbooks, trying to remind myself of the clinical detachment I was supposed to maintain. But no matter how much I studied, the vivid images he conjured refused to leave me. When Ryan finally returned, I took a few deep breaths, willing myself to stay calm. I reminded myself that he was just a 16-year-old boy, one whose life experiences had twisted him into something darker. He walked in with that same polite smile, settling into the chair opposite me. For a moment, I wondered what I'd been so afraid of. He looked harmless enough, just a boy in a hoodie, hands tucked into his pockets. But then his gaze sharpened and he tilted his head, almost as if he could read the discomfort on my face. "How was your week?" I asked, keeping my voice steady. "Normal," he replied, shrugging. "Nothing new. Just school and my parents being their usual selves." He looked up, meeting my eyes with a glint I couldn't quite place. "What about you? Did I make you uncomfortable last time?" His question threw me off balance. I felt a prickle of unease run down my spine, but I forced myself to respond. "This isn't about me," I replied, trying to maintain control. He grinned, a predator toying with its prey. "Right, but I'm curious, you know. People always act so different when they know the truth." I shifted in my seat, trying to ignore the tension building between us. "Let's focus on why you're here," I said, steering the conversation back to him. "Tell me more about what you feel when you do the things you do. Why did you hurt those animals?" Ryan leaned back, his eyes never leaving mine. "I just wanted to see what it felt like. They're just animals. It doesn't matter." "You knew it was wrong," I pressed, hoping for some hint of remorse. He shrugged again, a lazy smile crossing his lips. "Wrong? I mean, I guess other people would think so. But to me, it's just, whatever. They're weaker. If they can't defend themselves, isn't that their problem?" A chill settled over the room, the silence heavy with unspoken words. I forced myself to push through the dread. His words stirred in me. I had to know more about him if I was going to help him, or at least, that's what I told myself. "Have you ever thought about doing the same thing to people?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. He paused, a slow smile creeping onto his face. "Maybe. I think about a lot of things." My pulse quickened. I could feel a cold sweat prickling at my temples. I was supposed to remain composed, to never let clients see my fear. But in that moment, I realized I wasn't in control of this session. He was, and he knew it. As we spoke, I felt as if the walls were closing in, the air thick and stifling. Despite everything I'd learned, all the training I'd undergone, I couldn't shake the sense that I was just as trapped as those cats had been. And as Ryan looked at me, his expression unreadable, I understood that my fear wasn't just for him. It was for myself and the darkness that I could feel lurking just beneath his polite exterior. As our session continued, I found myself probing deeper, both out of professional duty and an almost morbid curiosity. Ryan was a puzzle, each piece more disturbing than the last, and I couldn't resist the compulsion to understand him. "So, Ryan," I began, carefully choosing my words, "you said you like the feeling of control. Is there a reason you feel a lack of it elsewhere in your life?" He seemed to consider this, a hint of a smirk playing on his lips. "Why does it matter?" You think I'm just some sad little boy who can't control his world, so he takes it out on everything else? I forced myself to hold his gaze. I'm not here to judge you, Ryan. I'm here to understand. Everyone needs control in their lives, but some ways of seeking it are more destructive than others. Maybe, he replied, a flicker of something crossing his face before it vanished. But what's the point in controlling anything if you don't make an impact? I bet none of those other kids you talked to even make a dent in your memory. I was taken aback by his perception. He was right in a way. So many cases blurred together, their stories merging into one painful whole. But Ryan was different. He wasn't really acting out of hurt or desperation. His actions were calculated, intentional, almost as though he viewed the world as his own personal stage. You're right that some cases are more memorable than others, I replied slowly, careful not to reveal too much. But every person I meet is unique. Everyone has their struggles, their reasons for doing what they do. He chuckled, the sound dark and unsettling. Reasons, huh? That's what you people always want, reasons. You think if you can find a reason, you can fix everything. But sometimes, things are just the way they are. No fixing, no reasons. Maybe you feel that way now, but there's always a reason beneath the surface, even if we can't see it at first. We're all shaped by our experiences, Ryan. Can you remember a time when you felt things were different? He leaned back, crossing his arms. Why would I want things to be different? People are fake. They lie, they pretend. If I can't trust anyone, why should I even bother? His tone held a hint of bitterness, something I hadn't heard before. I pressed on, hoping to dig deeper. But at some point, you must have wanted something more. Friendship, family, a sense of belonging. We all do. His gaze shifted to the floor, his posture tense. You don't get it, he murmured, almost as if to himself. People only care when they need something. It's better to keep my distance. In that moment, I felt a pang of sympathy, a glimpse of the hurt that lay beneath his hardened exterior. It was clear he had built walls around himself, shutting out anyone who might get close. But it was also clear that those walls had cost him, isolated him from the very things he secretly craved. Ryan, I said gently, it sounds like you've been let down by people you should have been able to trust. That can make it hard to open up to let anyone in. But it doesn't have to be this way. There are people who genuinely care, people who won't just let you down. He looked at me then, a strange expression on his face as if trying to decide whether or not to believe me. For a fleeting moment, I thought I saw a flicker of vulnerability, a crack in the mask he wore so well. But just as quickly, his face hardened again, the shutters coming down. Sure, he scoffed, his tone dripping with sarcasm. Everyone's just dying to help the freak who tortures animals. I know what they think of me. I know what you think of me. You're not a freak, Ryan, I said, my voice firm. You're a young man who's been through things no one should have to go through. But you don't have to let those experiences define you. You have a choice. His eyes narrowed, and for the first time, I saw something resembling anger. Choice. Do you think I chose any of this? I didn't ask for any of it. I didn't ask to be born into a family that doesn't care or to see people for the liars they are. He stopped abruptly, as if realizing he'd said too much. I seized the opportunity, sensing an opening. I understand that you feel abandoned, and that's left you questioning everything. But you have the power to create a different path. It's not easy, but it's possible. For a moment, he said nothing, his expression unreadable. Then he leaned forward, his voice a low murmur. You think I'm broken, don't you? Just another lost cause you'll analyze, file away, and forget about. No, Ryan, I replied, meeting his gaze. I think you're someone who's struggling, someone who's been hurt. But I also think you have the potential to change if you're willing to try. A tense silence settled between us, and I could feel the weight of his gaze on me, piercing and intense. He seemed to be assessing me, testing my resolve. And as I looked back at him, I realized that I, too, was being forced to confront my own beliefs and my own limitations. As the session drew to a close, Ryan finally spoke, his tone softer than before. Maybe you're right. Maybe I could change. But what if I don't want to? His words hung in the air, a chilling reminder that transformation is a choice, one he might not be ready or willing to make. And as he rose from his chair, offering me a casual, almost friendly nod, I felt a profound sense of uncertainty settle over me. Our next session loomed on the horizon, filled with questions and shadows I wasn't sure I was prepared to face. I knew I would keep trying, that I wouldn't give up on him. But as I watched him leave, I couldn't shake the feeling that the battle for Ryan's soul was one that would test us both, revealing truths about him and myself that I might not be ready to confront. The next few sessions with Ryan felt like a dance, each of us moving cautiously, testing the boundaries. He seemed to enjoy the game, prodding me with questions that challenged my patience, my composure, and on more than one occasion, my professional detachment. Why do you keep seeing me? He asked one afternoon, his tone almost playful. Isn't it obvious I'm a lost cause? I hesitated, choosing my words carefully. I believe people can change, Ryan. That includes you. Sometimes it just takes the right support and the right choices. He scoffed, crossing his arms as he leaned back in his chair. So I'm just some experiment to you? Another case study you can write about? No, I replied, my voice steady. You're a person, Ryan. You've been through things that have shaped the way you see the world. But that doesn't mean you're due to stay this way. Change is always possible if you want it. His eyes narrowed, a hint of skepticism in his gaze. People always talk about change like it's this magical thing. But I don't see it. I don't feel it. Why bother? Because staying the same might seem easier, but it often leads to more pain in the long run. You might not feel it now, but eventually, this path you're on will cost you. He studied me in silence, his expression unreadable. What if I don't care about the cost? What if I like the way I am? The room seemed to grow colder, his words hanging in the air. I could feel the weight of them pressing down, filling the silence between us. He was testing me, I realized, trying to see if I would flinch if I would look away. I didn't. Then that's your choice, I said evenly, but it could have serious consequences. People who walk this path often find themselves isolated and unable to connect with others. You may feel powerful now, but at what cost? He rolled his eyes, clearly unimpressed. Connection? Why does everyone think that's so important? All people do is lie, cheat, and hurt each other. I'd rather be alone. But you're here, I pointed out, leaning forward slightly. You chose to come to these sessions. Somewhere inside, maybe you want to change, even if it's hard to admit. He looked away, a flicker of something. Anger, resentment, crossing his face. I'm here because I have to be, not because I want to. They're just trying to fix me so they can feel better about themselves. I could sense the bitterness in his words, the wounds he carried beneath the surface. Maybe they're trying to help because they care. Not everyone's out to hurt you, Ryan. Sometimes people just want to make things better. He didn't respond, his eyes fixed on a spot on the floor. I let the silence stretch, hoping he would feel comfortable enough to open up. Finally, he spoke, his voice barely above a whisper. Why do you care? You don't know me. You don't have to deal with me outside of these walls. I'm just another case file to you. I leaned back, considering my response. You're right. I don't know you completely, but I care because I believe every person has the potential to find a better path, even if they can't see it themselves. My job is to help you see that possibility. He shook his head, almost as if he found the notion absurd. You really believe that, don't you? That everyone has this chance to be good or whatever? Yes, I do, I replied, meeting his gaze. I've seen people change in ways they never thought possible. But it takes courage and it takes work. He looked away again, a shadow of doubt crossing his face. Maybe, he muttered, almost too quietly for me to hear. But that doesn't mean I want it. There was a heaviness in his words, a sense of resignation that left me unsettled. Ryan was clearly grappling with something deeper, something he wasn't ready or willing to confront. But as much as I wanted to help him, I knew I couldn't force him to change. That decision had to come from within. As the session wound down, I offered him one final thought. Sometimes the hardest thing to do is to let someone in, to trust that not everyone will let you down. But it's worth it, Ryan. Life can feel empty when you shut everyone out. He rose from his chair, a cynical smile on his face. Maybe that works for some people, but me? I'm fine the way I am. He turned and left the room, leaving me alone with my thoughts. I knew that his words were a defense, a way to keep others at a distance. But I also knew that the wall he had built around himself was as much a prison as it was a shield. In the days that followed, I found myself haunted by our conversations, replaying them in my mind. Ryan had touched a nerve, a reminder that not everyone wants to be saved, and that some choose darkness over the light. But I couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to him, a part of him that wanted something better, even if he cooled it or wooled it, admit it. Our sessions continued, each one a struggle between his defiance and my persistence. Some days I felt I was making progress, glimpsing cracks in his armor. On other days it seemed as if we were back at square one, his walls higher and more impenetrable than ever. But as frustrating as it was, I couldn't bring myself to give up on him. Ryan was a challenge, yes, but he was also a young man on the edge, teetering between two paths. And as long as he kept coming back, I knew there was still hope, however fragile it might be. The sessions with Ryan became a part of my routine, each one a new chapter in a story that seemed to defy any easy resolution. He was guarded, cynical, and at times openly antagonistic. But beneath it all, I sensed a young man who was deeply conflicted, struggling with forces he cooled it or wooled it control. One day, Ryan arrived with a different look in his eyes, something darker and more intense. He settled into the chair opposite me, his expression inscrutable. Let's talk about control, he said, his voice low and almost casual, as if we were discussing the weather. Why do you think people are so obsessed with it? I felt a twinge of unease but kept my tone steady. Control gives people a sense of security. When we can predict or influence our environment, we feel safer, more grounded. He nodded, a hint of amusement flickering across his face. But isn't that all an illusion? Control is just a lie people tell themselves so they can sleep at night. What about you, Ryan? You've mentioned control before. Is it something you crave because you feel a lack of it in other areas of your life? He shrugged, a sly smile curving his lips. Maybe. Or maybe I just like reminding people that they don't have as much control as they think. It's funny, watching them squirm when they realize it. There was a menace in his tone, a deliberate challenge, and I felt the hairs on the back of my neck prickle. Ryan wasn't just playing a game. He was testing me, pushing to see how far he could go. So what does control look like to you? I asked, my voice calm but my mind alert. What would make you feel like you're truly in charge? He leaned forward, his gaze unflinching, being able to do what I want without anyone telling me otherwise. Knowing that I can make things happen, that I can change things if I feel like it. But power and control can come at a cost, Ryan, I said carefully. Sometimes the more you try to dominate others, the more isolated you become. Real power isn't just about having control over others, it's about having control over yourself. He scoffed, his expression cynical. Self-control? Sounds boring. Why waste time controlling myself when I can just do what I want? You say that now, but everyone has limits, I replied, my gaze steady. We all reach a point where we have to make a choice, whether to let our darker impulses take over or to find another way forward. His eyes narrowed, and I saw a flash of something I couldn't quite identify. And what if I like my darker impulses? What if I don't want to change? Then you've got to live with the consequences of that choice, I replied firmly. There's a cost to embracing darkness, Ran. It takes things away from you, your relationships, your peace of mind, even your future. You may feel powerful now, but that power is temporary. Eventually, it turns on you. He tilted his head, studying me with a look of mild curiosity. Do you really believe that I'll end up paying some kind of cosmic price for who I am? It's not about punishment, I said. It's about reality. Actions have consequences, and people who choose paths of destruction often find themselves trapped by them. You may think you're in control, but in the end, it's the darkness that controls you. He fell silent, his gaze flickering as he seemed to process my words. For a moment, I thought I'd reached him, that I'd managed to plant a seed of doubt. But then he straightened, a cold smile playing at the corners of his mouth. Maybe I'll just have to take that risk, he said, his tone light, almost dismissive. After all, I only get one life, right? Might as well make it interesting. As he spoke, I felt a deep sinking feeling in my gut. Ryan was standing on a precipice, teetering on the edge of something dangerous. He was drawn to the darkness, intrigued by the power it seemed to offer, and no amount of reasoning could pull him back if he didn't want to be saved. Yet despite his bravado, I could see the faintest hint of uncertainty in his eyes, a flicker of hesitation that gave me a sliver of hope. I knew I couldn't force him to change, but maybe, just maybe, I could show him that there was another path, one that offered more than the fleeting thrill of control. As our session drew to a close, I felt an unexpected resolve settle within me. Ryan was a challenge, but he was also an opportunity, a chance to make a difference in a young man's life, to show him that he didn't have to be a slave to the darkness within him. I didn't know how long it would take or if he would ever truly embrace change, but I knew I had to try. Because sometimes the smallest spark of light can be enough to dispel even the deepest shadows. In the following session, Ryan arrived with an almost uncharacteristic enthusiasm. There was a spark in his eyes, a barely concealed excitement that made me feel uneasy. He sat down, drumming his fingers on the arm of the chair as if he could barely contain himself. "What's on your mind today, Ryan?" I asked, noticing the shift in his demeanor. He leaned forward, his voice low and conspiratorial. "I did something new. I wanted to see if I could push things a little further." A knot tightened in my stomach. "What do you mean?" He smirked, clearly enjoying my discomfort. "Let's just say I put someone in a situation where they had to make a choice. I wanted to see how far they'd go." I kept my voice calm, masking the growing tension inside. "Can you tell me more about this situation?" He shrugged, looking almost casual. "There's this guy at school. He's a bit of a jerk, always acting like he's better than everyone else. I figured I'd test him, see what he'd do when things got a little difficult." "What did you do, Ryan?" He smiled, an unsettling glint in his eyes. "Oh, nothing illegal. Just left a note in his locker, suggesting he might find himself in a tough spot if he didn't change his attitude. Gave him a little push." My pulse quickened as he spoke, and I could feel a cold sweat beginning to form. "And how did he respond?" "He freaked out," Ryan replied, sounding almost proud. "Spent the whole day looking over his shoulder. He doesn't even know it was me. But the best part?" He leaned forward, his eyes bright with excitement. I could see the fear in his face, and he had no idea I was the one who put it there. I took a deep breath, choosing my words carefully. You felt powerful, didn't you? Watching someone else experience fear. He shrugged, the smirk fading slightly. I guess. It was interesting anyway, watching him lose control, knowing I had the upper hand. What do you think would happen if he found out it was you? Ryan chuckled, an edge to his voice. He wouldn't believe it. I'm just the quiet guy who sits in the back of the room. Besides, what could he do? It's not like I hurt anyone. I nodded, processing his words. Not this time. But these kinds of actions often escalate, Ryan. Today it's a note. Tomorrow it could be something more serious. You're playing a dangerous game. Or maybe I'm just showing people who they really are, he replied, a hint of defensiveness in his tone. People act all tough, but they crumble the moment they feel threatened. It's pathetic. Or maybe it's a reflection of your own fear, I suggested, hoping to push him to look inward. You're testing others because you're afraid of what's inside yourself. He narrowed his eyes, his expression hardening. You think I'm afraid? That's a laugh. I'm not afraid of anything. We're all afraid of something, Ryan, I replied, meeting his gaze. Fear is a part of being human, but instead of facing it, you're turning it outward, trying to control others to avoid dealing with your own feelings. His face darkened, and for a moment, I thought he might lash out. But instead, he leaned back in his chair, crossing his arms. You think you got me all figured out, don't you? That I'm just some scared little boy who can't handle his emotions. No, I said gently, I think you're someone who's been hurt and who's trying to protect himself the only way he knows how. But hurting others won't make the pain go away. It'll only make it worse. He looked away, his expression unreadable. Maybe, he muttered, but at least it makes me feel alive. For once, I'm the one in control. A silence settled between us, heavy with unspoken words. I could see the conflict in his eyes, the part of him that longed for connection warring with the part that craved power. Ryan was fighting a battle within himself, one that he wasn't ready or willing to face. After a few moments, he spoke again, his voice barely above a whisper. You really believe people can change, don't you? Yes, I replied, my voice firm. But it's a choice, and it's not an easy one. It means facing the things that scare you, the things you rather ignore. But if you're willing to try, I'll be here to help you. He gave a small, bitter laugh. Why would you care? I'm just another case to you, another messed up kid with a twisted mind. You're not just a case to me, Ryan. You're a person. And as long as you keep coming here, I'll keep showing up because I believe you're worth fighting for. He looked at me then, a mixture of anger and confusion in his eyes. I don't get you, he said, his voice low. Why would you waste your time on someone like me? Because I see potential in you, I replied, my tone gentle but unwavering. I see someone capable of more than he realizes, someone who can make a difference if he chose to. But that's a decision only you can make. He fell silent, his gaze dropping to the floor. For a moment, I thought I saw a flicker of vulnerability, a crack in the mask he wore so well. But just as quickly, he straightened, the cold indifference returning to his face. Maybe, he said, his tone dismissive. But don't hold your breath. As he rose to leave, I watched him, my heart heavy with a mixture of hope and uncertainty. Ryan was a young man standing at a crossroads, caught between the darkness and the light. I didn't know which path he would choose, but I knew I couldn't give up on him, not yet. Our sessions were a battle, a constant push and pull, and I could only hope that one day he would find the strength to confront the shadows within him. Until then, I would be there, a steady presence in the storm, waiting for the moment when he was ready to take the first step toward healing. Several weeks passed, and my sessions with Ryan continued with the same tense rhythm. There were days when he seemed almost open, his words hinting at the possibility of change. But more often he was guarded, deflecting my questions with sarcasm or indifference. Despite the progress we'd made, I could feel the limits of my influence, the invisible wall he had built around himself. Then one day, Ryan didn't show up. I waited, glancing at the clock, my heart sinking with each passing minute. I'd grown accustomed to his games, his small tests of control, but he had never missed a session entirely. I tried to push away the nagging sense of dread, reminding myself that there could be a perfectly reasonable explanation. But as the hours dragged on, that sense of dread only grew, gnawing at the edges of my mind. I reached out to his family, but they hadn't seen him either. Panic began to set in, an overwhelming fear that something had gone horribly wrong. It was late that evening when I finally received a call. A police officer's voice crackled over the line, informing me that Ryan had been found wandering the streets in a daze. He'd been picked up on suspicion of trespassing. But there was more, far more than I could have anticipated. I rushed to the station, my mind racing with questions. When I arrived, I was led to a small interrogation room where Ryan sat, his expression blank, his eyes dull. He looked up as I entered, a faint, hollow smile crossing his face. "Didn't think you'd come," he murmured, his voice barely above a whisper. I took a seat across from him, struggling to keep my emotions in check. What happened, Ryan? Why were you out there? He shrugged, his gaze distant. I don't know. Guess I just wanted to see what it felt like to let go. Let go of what? I pressed, my heart pounding. He looked at me, his eyes devoid of their usual defiance. Everything. I was just so tired of fighting. Tired of pretending I had control. For a moment, I saw the raw vulnerability he had hidden for so long, the part of him that was terrified, alone, and desperate for something he couldn't quite name. It was as if he had finally reached the edge, staring into the abyss he had spent so long circling. But then, just as quickly, his face hardened, a chilling glint returning to his eyes. He leaned back, crossing his arms, a faint smirk tugging at the corners of his mouth. Or maybe I was just bored. Who knows? I'm sure you've got all kinds of theories about me. I felt a wave of frustration and sadness, realizing that even now he was slipping back behind his mask, retreating into the darkness he knew so well. I could sense the walls going up, the small flicker of hope extinguish as he distanced himself once more. Ryan, I said, my voice firm but gentle, you don't have to keep doing this. You don't have to keep shutting everyone out. There's a way forward, but you have to be willing to take it. He looked at me, a faint hint of something, regret, flashing across his face. But then he smiled, a cold, unsettling smile that sent a chill down my spine. Maybe I'll take it, he replied, his tone almost mocking. Or maybe I won't. Guess you'll just have to wait and see. With those words, he rose to his feet, his eyes never leaving mine, a strange, unreadable expression on his face. I watched him leave, a heavy sense of finality settling over me. I had done all I could, but I knew that Ryan was a young man haunted by his own demons, a person who might never find his way back from the darkness. As I left the station, I couldn't shake the feeling that our story wasn't over, that Ryan would linger in my mind, a reminder of the delicate balance between light and shadow. He had chosen his path for now, but the future remained uncertain, a question mark hanging in the air, waiting to be answered. As I walked away, I found myself hoping that someday he would remember our sessions, that something I'd said might guide him, even if only in the smallest of ways, because in the end, the choice would always be his, and his alone.